We apologize for that. We got disconnected, but we are soon rejoining to continue with the conversation. Maybe just a highlight of what was being discussed before all the speakers join in. We've defined what GMO is, and that was clearly put by Dr. Kirimi, where we are talking about gene insertions into products that we grow. But also he explained about hybrids and the cross-pollination that happens either by hand or by wind, and therefore bringing on board, better performing crops. We've touched on issues around GM production, how we can, what should we do in terms of protecting the industry. And this has been clearly set by Jen, where, there's that
Lydia?
issue of looking at the market, then how do we do it here, doing the isolation spaces between the crops so that we do not contaminate for those who want to export. But also there's also a conversation that Timothy put across, which was quite clear in terms of what processes do we need to have in terms of looking at the markets that we're exporting to, and what we need to do so that we meet the requirements of those markets when we are growing those crops genetically modified. So Lydia, I don't know if Lydia has managed to join in. If she hasn't, maybe Jen, you can continue with that conversation. It was a question about, the policy, the debate, the public participation. What is the process of engagement, and how do we ensure that we have inclusive engagement in the policy space in contributing towards the GM debate and matters that would help understand GMO? So, Jen, you can proceed.
Um, Thanks, Nekesa. Fortunately, I was part of the conversation, the beginning of the conversation for it to have reached where we are now. If you remember, we had a problem with the cost of animal feeds, where private sector went and talked to the government to let us import into the country animal feeds from outside at a reduced tax so that they're cheaper. Now, when the government allowed this, but when they went around looking for product as private sector, they found that most of the product was not suitable for the Kenyan market because the standard was it should be less than 1% GMO. From our neighbors, this product was not available. All our neighbors were producing GMO products for animal feeds. So what the government did, it removed that requirement for 1% and decided that you can bring in the GMO product within, I think the percentage was increased to a little more than 1% so that we can get this product in. But even with that, there was a problem. So what we expected to happen, because even if Lydia is saying, okay, the perception out there is that there was no public participation, but it is the private sector who went actually to ask for some leeway to bring in animal feeds. So what we're expecting is a partial lifting, not blanket as it was. So it was agreed that animal feeds can come in, but now the way it is looking, everything now can come in. That was uninformed for whatever reason, but it is worth noting that the government's business is to feed its people and to ensure that there's no hunger. If the correct quality of food is not available, I remember when we were doing the debate on food safety, we talked to some of this is 2015, 2016, we spoke to some of the senior government policy makers, and they told us, let us first feed the people, let us fill the stomachs before we talk about food safety. So I think that is what the government is looking at. Let us first provide the food because that is what is available on the market now. And then we can talk about the issues later, because you cannot really look at your people hungry and there's food available. For us, it was uninformed. We were expecting a case by case consideration, but the blanket one has caught everyone by surprise. And the lack of information also on the GMOs, as I had mentioned earlier, is giving it a twist. Because for sure, most of the product that is on the market now has traces of GMO that is of a higher percentage than we would be comfortable with. The fact remains we can't produce enough food even within the country. And even if we started having strategies to produce the food now, it would not be available now that there's a problem. So where they're saying it is to mitigate food insecurity, it is an immediate problem, not a problem requiring strategy, which is more long term. They want to feed people now as they sort out the strategies we are all talking about. I believe we are all in a catch-22 situation, so I don't know how we shall mitigate that. But these debates that are going around is some of the ways we can get more information of, what this GMO will bring about or is supposed to bring about. And I'm sure there will be a lot of demystification on the GMO products. Thanks, Nekesa.
Thanks, Jen. Lydia is back. So Lydia, maybe you can proceed to, you are telling us something about the process. Yeah, please kindly unmute. Thank you.
Maybe Nekesa, for clarification, at what point did I drop off so that I don't have to repeat so much of what I'd already said?
I think you can just proceed because we had to create a new space. So just proceed from what the last conversation. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Lydia, you are on public participation.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. Just like so on the issue of public participation, the people feel they were not consulted. So of course they can as Kenyans, we can invoke that there was no consultation before that directive was made. Again, just like Jenny is saying that yes, we understand the interest of the government is to feed its people, but then perhaps should there have been it should have been controlled. If it is for food security purposes, that should have come out very clearly, because doing a blanket position like that opens us up for a lot of things. So Nekesa, you'd asked me to look into the policy aspects. One of the things that I had raised as a concern was the issue of policy coherence. So while the motivation is to feed the people, then we also have to look at our commitments. We are signatories to several international instruments. The Climate Change Convention on the Climate Change Convention framework of the UN, the UNFCCC, the Convention on Biodiversity Loss, and then this happens to be the decade of the UN ecosystems restoration. And there's empirical data to actually confirm that adoption of GMO production significantly affects or contributes to biodiversity degradation. So looking at our context as a country, we have 87% of our land being arsal. So we are also our land is being ravaged by the effects of climate change. So one of the ways that we have embarked on is to look at ecosystems restoration. And the ecosystem restoration, the biggest part is under croplands, where we conduct our agriculture. So if this is the same space where we will conduct our production in GMO, then that's the question. And also the size of land for our farmers, where we have the sizes ranging between 0.5 and 2 hectares. So do they have sufficient land for buffer zones, and how do you ensure that they do not contaminate? And then again, there has been the aspect of GM is a proprietary product. So it means that in some instances they are intellectual. We have instances of it being an intellectual property, and we have to pay royalties given the very high cost of production currently. Even as you use conventional methods of production, are we in a position to adopt that kind of technology, whereby farmers have to also use very specialized chemicals to manage and support production? So those are some of the things that we are looking at. And again, looking at our situation, a lot of our farming has been subsidized. But given the situation that we are now the limited fiscal space by government, and even the very dire debt situation. Even if the government wanted to support the production using GMO, the subsidy that they would want to extend or even would be required to support the farmers may not be available. So ultimately, we are looking at, in the long run, we are looking at a case where we are condemning a very large part of our population to poverty, because farming supports close to 30 million households. So what happens to them when our production gets on its knees? Then when you look at also, aside from that, we have the ASTGS that has a very strong focus on increasing the incomes of the smallholder farmers and also building their resilience. So you find that increasing the cost of production erodes their incomes, making it biodiversity loss also erodes their incomes, because GMO production, for it to be effective and economically sound, then you need large tracts of land. A lot of our farmers have small sizes of land. So, and while it is very good in monocropping, for climate change adaptation and resilience building, we are now promoting diversification. So you find that there is quite a bit of conflict in terms of not just the aspect of food security, but when you look at all these other aspects, when you look at the from a trade standpoint, as an East African community, we are yet to have a harmonized biosafety policy, because the member states are at different levels of adoption of GM. A lot of them are very skeptical. We are the only ones that are in the affirmative. So by adoption of this, what does that mean? Are the other member states ready to have their production processes, for example, compromised by GM production that is coming from Kenya, given our very porous borders? Then it is very likely that what comes into Kenya is likely to make its way into our member states. So how have we looked at that? And ultimately, it is going to affect even our ability, well, we want to trade, but also our ability to just build resilience, because you find that African problems are homogeneous. If we have a food insecurity situation, then it happens to be a similar challenge in our neighbors. So there is need to look into this. And then, of course, just finally on the issues that are plaguing agriculture. Where are we pursuing very sophisticated solutions while even the very rudimentary have still not taken root? The basics of encouraging water harvesting on large scale to supplement the rain-fed production, so that we start addressing some of these things. So we really need to relook into our rule book and our playbook before we can now say that we are ready for these kinds of technologies. Thank you very much, Nekesa.
Thank you, Lydia. I think some of the questions, some of the points you've raised, I would like Kirimi to just touch on them and probably respond to them, and probably also touch on the issue around the ethics around GM production. There's a question that Jen had raised, and I see Timothy wants to speak. Maybe you can speak. You can speak, and then Kirimi responds to the questions. On the issues of you had mentioned about species and species, species by species. That's the conventional way that we know breeding, and we know that's how it has been over the years. But then here it is, we are having gene insertion. So those are the things that you can probably think about. As Timothy speaks, then you respond to the questions, Kirimi. Timothy?
Yes, thank you. On the policy still, we also need to create, since now we have already declared that we can have GMO in the country, we need to create public awareness on exactly, and we have free flow of information on the pros and the cons. Therefore, that for the policy makers, let's also create public awareness of exactly what is this GMO, or what exactly, like now whatever we are discussing, it requires to go to the public, let them know so that they can make a choice. I also noted that on the policy again, I was thinking of exactly what is aiding our country. And one thing is that we have this issue of everybody going to real estate. We have agricultural land which is not which is being converted to real estates, and these are areas that we could convert the way it has been working out before, whereby we have commercial villages. For example, if you want avocado, we knew that you have to go to Muranga. If you want sweet potatoes, commercial villages Kiangwashe in Karatina, Nyeri. And at the same time, I'm also asking myself, what will happen to our Kenya seed production companies? What is the policies that we do have to protect our seed companies like Simros, like Caro, like East African Seed, and many others which are maybe doing some multiplication. So we do not need to have that blanket flow or freedom that we have GMO in the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy. Kirimi?
Thank you so much for having me again, and I just want to give a little bit of my views about what is the safeguards or what is the safeguards on the who can work on the GMO or the genetic engineering. I have been part of the several organizations which have been doing that, and I know the type of the strict restrictions. The labs are completely registered by the government, and actually they are very controlled. Before you ever do anything, you have to have an isolated, even if you are in a complex of a laboratory, you have to be in a completely place which is isolated from all the other actions which are being done by other people who are working in different areas in the lab. So if you go actually to the lab, they are highly regulated. The things which comes from the lab where they are normally grown is completely isolated, and they're usually in a greenhouses where it's impossible. You cannot even enter there. And if you enter in a place like that, you have to wear special clothes so that when you come out of it, you're not even going to come with a pollen or something. You have to remove those clothes to be able to enter. So the way I know, maybe things will change, because if then the ban has been removed, maybe more and more organizations are going to work on this. But the current regime of restrictions are so strict that even you as a person, you may be working in the same place, in the same lab, but you will not be able to have access to the place where there is any genetic modification which is being done. So at the moment, there is a lot of, the strictness is very high, but I cannot speak on the future. There was several questions which have been raised, and first of all, I want to talk about the biodiversity. I think we need to be careful, and we need to really actually go back to the literature and find out many of those many of those papers which talked about biodiversity. There are actually very few papers which you can ever come up which are strictly scientifically that you can talk about that there has been a degradation of biodiversity because of growing of the GM. Actually, the reason why there is degradation of biodiversity in areas where they grow GM, like in Brazil, Canada, and in the US, is because of the fact that in most of those places, they grow what we call monocropping. And part of the genetic modification of some of these crops, they have been done so that they can either resist they can resist the pesticides, so that you can be able to not the pesticides, but the chemicals which are used to kill all the other plants, so that you can have the highest production of either the soybeans or the maize. So in that case, if there is monocropping or there is a wide range of killing of all these other, because you're using resistant crop, which is a plant which has been modified to resist the herbicide, then in that case, you have a problem of biodiversity. But I actually want to debunk the issue about this, because, and also the issue about the seed. When it comes to the seed, who produces the seed? The part I've been involved with, or the part I know about, particularly in Africa, most of the crops which have been genetically modified in Africa, or even in Kenya, are actually modified by our local universities and local CALO or CG centers or ATF. And all those are the organizations which are doing. And the way they handle those things, those crops, is very different from the way Monsanto or now Bayer is handling. Bayer works on that and works on those exclusivity. But in this case of these crops which I'm talking about, and I'll give you examples, sweet potato, cassava, maize, and drought resistant, those are very different, that they have been locally modified, locally produced, such that now Karo or Kenyatta University, which has been very key, or the Sinji centers, which have been key in doing this, they are going to figure a way of licensing the local seed multipliers to be able to do that. So that is now a process, I think, which is now coming up, because the CG centers at Kalo, they are the initial stages of understanding how to use the IP to protect the crops. So the assertion that the seed which will be grown is going to come from outside may be partially not true. Yes, there will be some seed which will be coming outside, but for most particular things, like for drought resistant, for things like weevils in sweet potato, for things like late blight for potato, all that has been done either by the Sinji Center or by Kenyatta University, Nairobi University, or Karo, the ones in Kenya. I can talk about cassava, which has been done in ITA in Nigeria. So in that case, for the seed, the fear that people have is actually not true. If only we can then be able to reactivate these IP for our local organization. If it's a Sinji Center, the Sinji Center, the rules of a Sinji Center, because they use public money, or even if you use Bill and Melinda Gates money, you use public money, you are supposed to give out that IP for free. In most cases, that is what is supposed to be done. You actually give it to local local research center, and that is the one which hold the authority, and then they can license whoever they want to license. So that is really not true. So when it comes also to the issue about the increasing the cost of production, actually the truth is different. I'll give you an example. If you have to grow potato, which takes 3 months, you have to do between 10 and 15 times of using pesticides, because using fungicide, because of late potato blight. If you use the potato, which actually has been developed by International Potato Center, which is already the trials in Uganda, they show that it's 100% tolerant or resistant to potato blight. So that means you reduce 10 to 15 times of spraying on that crop if you're going to get it, and then that means your cost of production is going to go down. Then the production is going to go down because you use less pesticides. The farmers have less interaction with the pesticides and poisoning. So in that case, that is not true. When it comes to the drought-tolerant crop, when you use that, it means that you don't use as much irrigation as you need to do. So that means the cost of producing this is not as high. But when you're talking about Monsanto, that is completely different. So we're talking about, when you talk about genetic engineered crops, you engineer them for many different things. There was also the issue of why are we doing this when we have all the other tools? The answer is very simple. You do not exclude, if you have a toolbox, you do not say we cannot use this tool because it's very effective. No, you have all the tools. Kenya will have all the tools, including genetic modified and hybrid, the local OPVs and everything. So it is the farmers themselves who are going to make decisions of what makes sense for them, what they need to grow and what they can't grow, depending on what they want to do. So what we are talking about here is removing the fact that me as a scientist, or you as a scientist, or as an advocate, making decisions for the farmer. Let the farmer make decisions, and we assume that the farmers are very smart. They will make decisions which are very good for their own commercial interest. So we are handing more tools. These other tools will never be removed, so they will be part of it. And when we are in a problem, it means that then we can use all these tools when they are needed. There was an issue about gene insertion, and then there was a question of interspecies. Yes, in some cases, like the BT cotton or the BT maize, yes, that is actually an interspecies insertion of the gene. But actually, for most of the other genetic modified things I'm talking about currently, whether it is cassava, whether it is the other potato, sweet potato, we talk about the maize for drought resistant, and for the other for vitamin A, for zinc, for zinc, for iron, for pearl millet, and also for vitamin A for cassava. All that has nothing to do with the interspecies. It is actually using local material, local cassava, but different populations which are in different areas, or using what we call randlaces, the ones which are very far, or wild material which are in the same species but different varieties of the same crop, that you get a gene from here and put it, so it's not interspecies. But as I said again, even those interspecies, I say, I've talked about sweet potato, which everybody has been eating. There is an interspecies in each of those sweet potato you eat, but it has not affected anybody for many, many years, for hundreds of years, even in Africa or in Southern America. There was an issue about most of the, I want to say most of the GMO will be locally produced. It will be locally made here. So in that case, you are able to make decisions. When you talk about also the issue of commercial interest, I know, yes, when it comes with anything which is export, that is a problem. And the problem is a lot of the places where we take our crops, not our crops, our agricultural product like the flowers, in Europe, like UK, Germany, and all that, they do not like GMO. So in that case, we have to be careful. And that is why I think the regulators, when there was Drosophila, this is a nice flower which is used as a filler material. When it was taken to be approved, it was refused. And the main reason is not because of contamination or anything. It is because of fearing that we are going to lose our export market for the flowers. But I want also to say here that the next area of business in farming is something we talk about nutraceuticals. That is where you look at a crop which is normally used, and then you genetically modify it to be able to provide for you something like antibiotics, something like insulin, or even vitamin A, vitamin D, iron, and zinc, things which are major public health problems in the world currently and in Africa. Like the iron deficiency in Africa, in most countries, is more than 50% for women and also for children. If there is any way we can use a crop which is like maize or cassava, which is used, and we modify it with its own species, and we get more iron, we get more zinc in it, then we save a lot of lives. So what I'm trying to say is, we engage with something we call about the next frontier of medicine is actually not the medicine we know. It is where a lot of genetic engineering is being done for the crops we are going to be eating is going to become part of our healing process. And that's why, as we say, let food be their medicine. If we have to do that, Africa cannot then decide that we are not going to enter into this bandwagon. We need to enter into this bandwagon, but regulate it effectively, ensure there is labeling, ensure that whoever needs to use it can use it, and whoever doesn't want to use it then has a choice not to use it. We are talking about a lot of area where our young scientists then can have a lot of area to commercialize their talent. And this is when we say that we can't do this, it means that we are removing all that possibilities of new employment, new job area, new industries. We are removing out of it. But as I said, the main problem, as we have all agreed upon here, is communication. Who sets the narrative? The narrative has to be the correct narrative, like what now we are talking about, where some colleague has their own ideas or their own information, you bring it up, somebody else has another information, you bring it up, you put it out there, and then the public is able then to consume this information and make decisions. Scientists have completely failed. Government have failed. I do agree that the government, for them to do this blanket allowing, there should have been some level of consultation with the stakeholders, which was not done. That's not the way you use science then to inform decision making in a government. It can be done in a better way, which means it can smoothen all these schemes of a lot of noise and discussions which are going on there. But I say, as Lydia said, Jane clearly said, sometimes when we are in a crisis, when government and even families and organizations are in a crisis, that's when they can make the tough decision. And I agree, as far as I'm concerned, the decision which was made by this government is because we're in a crisis, And I think they can now do something which, to me and to the scientist community and to anybody who has worked in the food industry, in the food systems, and particularly things which are touching also to health, how food, nutrition, agriculture affects our health. I think this is a good move. But then we need to figure out how to work with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirimi. So as we come to the end, I know we were cut short in between, hence we had to catch up on the few minutes. But as we come to the end, I know there's a lot to be discussed, especially on issues around policy, on issues around awareness, because this is critical. How is this being done? This has been raised across board. But then, as we end, I would like us to just take each one of us to give like 3 minutes each on a parting shot. And in the parting shot, what we would like to see also is something around, and maybe this would be targeted to the scientists in the panel, issues around breaking resistance, issues around we are now thinking about one particular trait that we are putting into this product that we are growing under genetic modification. What happens to the other insects? What happens to the fauna in the soil? What happens when that resistance is broken? And I know there's some discussions, especially in China, around the BT cotton because it has been grown for a while. So let's look at this, and then we have our parting shot. And again, focus on policy. How do we engage as stakeholders to get this moving? And also for the listeners, please, we have a chat box. Keep the conversations going. We'll have another time to have a space just to pick up from what has been raised in terms of the questions, in terms of the discussions that are going on. So I'll start with Timothy, then we'll have Jane, then Lydia, then Cindy. Then we can end the space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Quite a lot of information that is available. The only thing is that it has not reached out to the relevant people, and more so as a marketer and as a farmer, there's a lot of information that we require. One thing is that I want to us to take home is that GMO, the government authorizing that you can now use GMO in the country is not going to be the solution until we have the policies and the requirements and all the regulations done. And I think it is not going to take less than 1 year. So as for the time being, let's look for the actual solutions. And for the coming season, let's adhere to the agronomical requirements, and so that we can produce enough for our people. Let's utilize exactly what we have at the moment. And I would like to refer you to an evaluation which was done in China again, an evaluation of adverse effect events of genetically modified consumption, a systemic review of animal and human studies. This is quite, and they concluded that there are serious adverse effects of GM consumption, but also there are also good things about it. So I would like to refer you to that study. It's quite an interesting one. And at the same time, let's know and accept that we do have both positive and the negative. The Kenyans need to be made aware. Let them be made aware. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. You can share the link on the chat so that we can review it later. Thank you. Jen?
Thanks, Nekesa. I'm not a scientist per se, but I'm a realist now. We've already been allowed to bring in this GMO product. We've been allowed to grow it, but that doesn't force us to use it. We have to make informed decision for ourselves. I'm one of the people who looks at the positives, the advantages, and the opportunities that arise from such drastic changes into our system. Like for now, I've seen a comment in the comment section that we have non-existent traceability system. So yes, we need to now work with our regulators to ensure that we have a proper working traceability system in place. it brings about now, as I said, the use of standards and traceability systems. We need to embrace it for ourselves. We need to understand them. We need to actually practice them, not because the law says we must, or not because somebody will come with a big stick, and punish us for not having them, but because it is good for us to prove that whatever we are doing produces the food and the products that our customers require. So for me, it's we can look at it, we can continue looking at the negatives, but for me, it's giving us an opportunity to improve our systems and to ensure that our traceability systems within this country work. It is an opportunity for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. We can have Lydia. Or let's have Cindy, then Lydia, because I want to ask Lydia one last question before we close. So Cindy, your parting shot.
Yeah, I've been asked in my parting shot to talk about what about these resistance. I always say that I think we need more of this. We need more of what we call social and behavior change communication using the behavior science to be able to have more and more of this communication where we can have a dialogue which is free. In that case, more people can get more information from either side, and in that case, we will be able to go. Then there was also the issue about the breaking of the resistance. Any technology, including the phone you're holding on the computer or anything we are using now, including Twitter, everything is evolving. So there is always a trend mill. It's called a trend mill in all technology. So as people breed new things or they do genetic modifying, also the other things, if it is insects or other things also, they are also trying to beat it up. So there will always be science, so there'll always be a place for our children to go back to school and ensure that they do better work than we're able to do. And then there was an issue, is there anything? And I would want to say, we need to have what we call a tool, a bundle of a toolbox, which we can use. The other thing is that there is no technology under the sun, which is a silver bullet. So hybrid is not a silver bullet. GMO is not a silver bullet. Can we have a bundle of solutions which farmers can use? That means good agronomic practices, which that means good extension, good inputs, and also good crops, which are goods and then good seed. If we have all these, including other technologies like water solution, then in that way we can have food and other things in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. For Lydia, this is something that I quoted from a media post, and this came from the Cereal Marketers Association, and they raised issues around labeling, the requirements of labeling. So this affects trade. Labeling requirements which were put in place. They give a consumer. They give the consumer. Sorry, let me repeat that. Labeling requirements which were put in place to give the consumer a choice is complicated and technically demanding. And also there's an issue of the fine that comes with that, if you don't label, if you don't declare, there's a fine of about 20 million Kenya shillings or 10 years imprisonment. That was the proposal in 2012 that was put there. If you look at this and looking at trade, we are trying to lower the cost of the animal feeds. At the same time, there's the issue of traceability that Jacqueline has clearly raised in the chat, which also probably affects what we are going to consume. There's no evidence currently in terms of what actually gets into the animals, what we eat at the end, but that is just research. So we've not reached that level. But how does all this affect our going forward? And I'll pick up a question from Kelvin, who mentioned about the need for food security. Is this the way to go? Is this the way to fight? But at the same time, can you touch on issues around trade, issues around the EPS that we have, the agreements that we have across board, AFCTA, COMESA. I know you mentioned ESC, but mention COMESA and AFCTA as well. So welcome, Lydia.
Thanks, Nekesa. And to begin with, on the issue of labeling, you realize that I had indicated that Kenya is a signatory to, is a member of the WTO. And by being a member of the WTO, by extension, we are signatories to the TBT, the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement. And one of the principles is prevention of deceptive practices. So when the labeling requirements are that stringent, it is consistent with the requirements and provisions of the TBT agreement, because failure to label, and especially since the ban that time was premised on health conditions, then that is why the fine is that hefty, to ensure that traders are consistent and are providing truthful information, and by extension not having deceptive practices. And remember that the government regulates in the public of the in the interest of the public. So you have to appreciate that in doing so, the government was following consistently with the decision they had taken to ban GMO foods, because there was empirical data at that point that was used to inform the imposition of the ban on health, on the grounds of health. So that is consistent with the TBT agreement, and it is usually done to prevent deceptive practices, so that the product information, the information on the label, is supposed to be consistent, and that is why the national standard bodies conduct regular market surveillance, so that in the event that products in the market are inconsistent with what they declare on their labels, then they have to be withdrawn, because they are as a result, because in so doing, when they are misrepresenting information of what is in the product versus what is on the label, then it may have very far-reaching consequences. And in this case, given the context, that was on of health conditions. And again, the TBT agreement allows member states of the WTO to take decisions that, or to take, to regulate in the interest of health, national security, for as long as they can legitimize a reason under the WTO agreement, then they are allowed to regulate. So in so doing, then Kenya was not violating the WTO agreement, because they had already established the health reasons on which they were taking the decision. And then on the issue of trade, I think I had mentioned earlier before, I had not realized that the chat, the space timed out. But you realize that in terms of trade, we are looking at the AFCFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, is being implemented through regional economic communities. So that means what we have agreed as the East African community is what suffices. So you find that, for example, to facilitate the trade in goods protocol, we already are working towards having implementing our SPS protocol at the EAC region, since now all members have ratified it. So that instrument is what is going to comply with the Annex 7 in the trade in goods, that is on SPS. So under the AFCFTA, we are not developing new instruments, but instead we are using the instruments that are present in the regional economic communities. In the context of GMOs, you realize that the East African community does not have a harmonized position or policy framework on GMOs. So Kenya is the one that has a very clear stand, which is in the affirmative, that yes, now we are allowing GMOs, but you find that all our neighbors have adopted a very skeptical stance in terms of why, in terms of adoption of GMOs. So Tanzania, for example, has stepped up vigilance. Uganda, the president has demanded that there needs to be sufficient evidence presented before any decision can be taken in the affirmative. So given the porous borders that we have experienced, and this is very live in the case of horticulture, where we have molecules that haven't been approved in Kenya by the pest control still find their way into the production processes of our horticulture, and that has ultimately resulted in interceptions in the EU market. So what makes us think that in our context, when we approve GMOs, they will not also filter into our neighboring countries, and as a result, given again the issue of the food security situation and even the nutritional aspects, because you find that now it is also going to find its way into other countries. Aside from, given that it encourages monocropping and we still have significant nutritional deficiencies in the continent. So we look at, and that is why a lot of crop diversification has been encouraged, not just to address food security, but to address both food and nutrition security. So if we are producing soya exclusively or maize exclusively, how do we step up? I know we've been told about the sophisticated nutritional aspects of getting our food as medicine, but in the context of the African continent, a majority are informal. They are a majority of the population lives below the poverty line. So we have to be innovative, and one of these ways is doing what? Crop production, which is consistent with the practices of smallholder farmers, because it addresses both food and nutrition security. So finally, in my parting shot, when we adopted trade liberalization and joined the WTO in the 1995, shortly after adopting the structural adjustment programs, the narrative was that as we open ourselves more to trade, then we are going to develop our economies. But lo and behold, look at what has happened. Instead of industrializing, Africa is experiencing premature deindustrialization. So in economics, it is said that in God we trust, but everyone else must bring data. And given that precedent, then we are likely to make a projection that even in the case of the GMOs, while we are looking at a food security situation in the future, when you look at the requisite policy provision and institutional framework to support successful adoption of GMOs, we are still very wanting. And this is because when you look at an industrial policy, it has three components. It has a command and control, where you overregulate in the event that you have underdeveloped private sector systems, which is the occurrence for Kenya and a lot of developing countries. We have access to information, and the other is ability for the government to remain accountable. So in the absence of properly developed private sector, where we have strong code of ethics in place and a lot very strong self-regulation, then implementing GMOs in the context where we are still heavily overregulated, it will call upon the government to increase enforcement. And we're already grappling with issues of enforcement, even with basic things, even like in the case of KS 1758. So what makes us think that now, as we adopt GMO, we will need to increase capacities of enforcement in an already constrained government situation, given our debt stress and also the recession that we are facing as a result of the pandemic. So again, the blanket lift was a move in the wrong direction. While we appreciate that maybe a temporal lift specifically for food security, so it is food and not seed, that would have worked in the short term. And then, of course, replace it and continue on the case-by-case basis for in the interest of food security, biodiversity conservation, and especially poverty reduction and inclusive economic growth, given that seed saving is also something that is very strong, that has a very strong gender aspect. So the introduction of GMO is going to increasingly make production very skewed in terms of gender and, of course, lifting millions out of poverty. Thank you very much, Nekesa, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. I think from the beginning of the week, I've been listening into so many conversation, and I think this just wraps up the week. And I believe that we can all get to the chat box, even post this space, just to keep the discussions going. I see people who are joining. We have two spaces that one started and dropped off. We have two spaces on the soccer page. So at Soccer Kenya, you can go there and listen to the first space that we had started, and this would be the second space just to contribute to this discussion. We are not ending it here. We are going to push for policies around making it safe for the Kenyan small farm holder. That one I learned yesterday. It's no longer small holder farmer, but small farm holder, because some of them are actually commercializing even in their small space. And we keep the conversations going. Let's open up. Let's have an open mind. Let's also learn how to protect our agriculture. Let's not just as Cindy had said, we can use local materials. So why not use those local materials to improve what we are doing in terms of improving agriculture? So thank you so much to our speakers, Jen, Kirimi, Lydia, Timothy. Unfortunately, Henry was not able to join, but I hope he can join next time just to speak about the policy space. So thank you and have a good evening, Timothy. Unfortunately, Henry was not able to join, but I hope he can join next time just to speak about the policy space. So thank you and have a good evening. And those who are waking up, good morning and good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Nekesa.
Thank you,
Bye.
Nekesa, for inviting me.
Thank you everyone for joining us.
Asante sana. Asante sana.